Good afternoon and welcome to United Nations in Geneva. Welcome to this press conference with Reem Alsalem. 3 years ago, the Human Rights Council appointed Ms. Alsalem to carry out the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, its causes and consequences. As it happens, this year marks the 30th anniversary of this important mandate. Ms. Alsalem is an independent consultant on gender issues, the rights of refugees, migrants, transitional justice, and humanitarian response. She consulted extensively with United Nations departments, agencies, and programs, such as UN Women, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNICEF, the International Organization for Migration, as well as non-governmental organizations, think tanks, and academia. Ms. Alsalem worked with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees as an international civil servant in 13 countries, where she planned, implemented, and monitored programs that served to protect survivors of gender-based violence, particularly women and girls. On Friday, just gone, Ms. Alsalem presented her latest report to the Council with the theme of prostitution and violence against women and girls. She will now make a short statement, and after this we will take questions. Just a reminder, please state your name and your media. Ms. Alsalem, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for all journalists and media that have joined us. As was mentioned, I presented my report on violence against women and girls and prostitution. I chose to present the report on this issue for a number of reasons. One of them being my concern about the increased commodification of the sexual and reproductive functions of women and its normalization in society, and the wide-reaching harm that it has on gender equality, but also relations between men and women. And the other reason I chose this subject is because so far we have not had in the UN a comprehensive study or report on the human rights consequences of prostitution. There are different reports on parts of the issue, but there hasn't been a comprehensive one, and it has certainly not been analyzed in relation to human rights standards. So this report, or in preparation for this report, I presented a call for input. I want to assure everyone that there was a lot of engagement on the report. I was very pleased to see that. I received 300 submissions in response to the call for input, in which 60 countries were mentioned that cover 7 geographical regions. And I also personally held 7 consultations with 86 persons that represent women with lived experiences in prostitution, some of them that have exited. For that group, I even held one consultation that was specifically with them, dedicated to them. But then the rest were civil society organizations, were NGOs, were experts, UN agencies, etc. So in the report, I categorically conclude that prostitution is a system of inequality and discrimination based on sex and other intersecting grounds, which affects a woman's ability to achieve equality. 3 groups of actors take part in this system of exploitation and abuse: individuals, who are usually men and boys, who buy sexual acts; the victims, usually women and girls, who are bought to satisfy these sexual acts; and third parties who organize or profit or benefit from prostituting women and girls. The term prostitution system is what I feel adequately and correctly reflects my finding that prostitution is intrinsically linked to different forms of violence against women and girls, and that constitutes a form of violence in and of itself. So within that, I also define and understand pornography to be a part of prostitution, in that it is filmed prostitution, and I dedicate also extensive parts of the report to it. Terminology was a main focus of this report, and you will see that I use the terms prostituted women and girls rather than sex worker. I also use the term exploitation of prostitution of women and girls rather than sex work, because they align with international human rights law, and because the terms sex work and sex worker sanitize and hide the harms experienced by women and girls. Most of the women and girls with lived experiences also reject these terms, sex work and sex worker, because in their view, and according to them, it gaslights them, it gaslights their experience, an experience of extreme violence and violations of their fundamental human rights. As I say in my report, the development of prostitution systems is heavily influenced by patriarchal norms and the accompanying abuse of power and sexual demand by men. And it is exacerbated in recent decades by globalization, where everything can be bought and sold. It is exacerbated by economic inequalities, conflict, occupation, increased militarization, destruction of ecosystems by extractive industries, the legacies of colonialism, war, complex emergencies, and humanitarian consequences, all which result in the further marginalization and forced displacement of women and girls. Women and girls face multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and inequalities, and therefore are amongst the most susceptible to enter, engage, or remain in prostitution, and therefore also are among the most exposed to violence. I also present example on how prostitution thrives on sexualizing and racializing poverty, targeting women, particularly those from minorities and marginalized backgrounds. So I say how it sexualizes, for example, Black women, Asian women, and also depends very much on a steady inflow and sort of disposal availability of migrant women. As a result, prostituted women and girls often have irregular status, no access to effective assistance, protection, services, or livelihood opportunities. And collectively, all these conditions increase their risk of further exploitation, sexual assault, and coercion. In a nutshell, prostitution results in egregious human rights violations and multiple forms of violence against women and girls, where they are often dehumanized and perceived as persons without human rights. It violates the rights of women and girls to dignity, privacy, freedom of movement, and the right to form a family. These acts often constitute torture, inhuman and degrading treatment, and they constitute physical, psychological, and economic forms of violence, both online and offline. The perceived right of men to purchase a sex act normalizes the systematic violence inflicted on women through prostitution, including in pornography, because it erases the boundaries between what counts as sex and what counts as sexual violence. And it has far-reaching impact on shaping the sexual expectations of men and boys. Furthermore, the equal participation of women in society becomes impossible to achieve when we normalize prostitution, as it is fundamentally based on inequality between men and women. Digitally facilitated prostitution also promotes trafficking of women and girls for sexual exploitation. In the report, I also review the different legal and policy models adopted by states that exist on prostitution. There are states that have a prohibition approach, many of them that actually don't even acknowledge that prostitution exists, prefer to turn away from it. There is the regulation approach, there is the decriminalization approach, and then there is the abolition approach. I believe that reviewing applicable international standards, particularly those relating to the duty not to discriminate against women and girls, the right to dignity, their duty to protect from violence, as well as protect children from violence, I believe that the best model that we have available in order to improve the prevention and response to violence against women and girls in prostitution is actually the abolitionist model, otherwise known as the equality model. I also call on states, therefore, to recognize prostitution, including pornography, as a system of exploitation and violence, and I remind states of the responsibilities to abolish laws that allow, tolerate, or condone the violence and exploitation of women and girls in prostitution, including pornography. The abolitionist model or equality model has 5 pillars, which I'm briefly going to mention. and thereby also say why it is the best model available. First of all, it relies on decriminalizing women and girls in prostitution, meaning considering them as victims. Second is to provide them comprehensive support and exit pathways. Third, and this is really important, which is to criminalize the purchase of sexual acts in order to address the issue of demand. Because until we address the issue of demand for sexual acts, we will not be able to abolish prostitution. Then there is also the criminalization of all forms of pimping. And finally, implementing sanitization campaigns for sexual acts buyers. I do believe that when we refer to prostitution, a human rights-based terminology and language must be used at all times to describe it. We must prevent also the weaponization of anti-trafficking policies to avoid addressing this issue of prostitution as a form of violence against women and girls by creating a harmful and artificial disassociation between so-called quote-unquote forced prostitution assimilated to trafficking from so-called quote-unquote free prostitution assimilated to sex work. And in fact, as you will see in the report, and as international human rights law says, the concept of consent in the situation of prostitution is irrelevant because these are situations of extreme abuse, exploitation, and therefore we cannot speak really of consent in such conditions. So I will stop here and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Alsalem, for your statement. Now we're ready to start taking questions. Are there any for the Special Rapporteur? Yes, over here. Just before you speak, can you just say who you are and who you represent? Thank you.
Yeah, Paula Dupré-Yes, I'm a freelance journalist. I wanted to ask you, well, first of all, if I was late, it's because there's another event that's taking place in another room, presenting the opposite argument. I just wanted to understand a little bit better. I mean, prostitution's been around for as long as humanity's been around. And I think that there have been attempts to perhaps legalize in the past, which have not been successful. What people are arguing, other people are arguing, is that by decriminalizing, you're actually giving women all rights that you seem to say they would not have through decriminalization. I'm just wondering exactly what, how you would like to address the fundamental issues. I mean, how those fundamental issues should be addressed. I mean, in the end, it's an issue of poverty. These women are actually, they may not have other options to make a living. So, yeah, I'd like to understand a little bit how you'd like to address those sort of more fundamental issues in a time where both, countries, states, as well as organizations that may be helping women are challenged in terms of resources.
Yes, thank you for that question. So you made reference to a side event that is happening where civil society groups, at least some of them, are advocating for complete legalization of all aspects of prostitution and decriminalization. I wish to highlight that ahead of my report, I actually consulted with a wide range of civil society organizations, and as I said, women with experience, with lived experience. The vast majority of organizations and actors I engaged with do favor the equality model that I spoke about. And in fact, within this proposal, there are things that we agree on with those advocating for legalizing all aspects of prostitution. There are two things that we agree on, actually. One is that the women themselves should be decriminalized, meaning they should not be put in prison, they should not have a criminal record, they should not be treated as criminals, shouldn't be deported, they should be treated as victims. And by referring to them as victims, we are actually, and we are not saying anything degrading. We are saying that they have experienced fundamental violations of their human rights and that they are entitled to reparations, they are entitled to justice, they are entitled to assistance, and they are entitled to protection. And they are also entitled to participate fully in designing solutions to their own issues. So we agree on that. Also, based on the input I have received, those advocating for legalizing all aspects of prostitution agree that violence often happens in context of prostitution. So there is no disagreement on that. Now, it is important, of course, I understand that there is underlying causes for why women and children enter prostitution, are entrapped on prostitution, and then also find it extremely difficult to leave, even if they want. One of them is the threats, the control by pimps and those that benefit prostitution. Other causes are, as you rightly mentioned, the fact that often they have no other alternatives for livelihood. However, that does not mean that we should then condone it, as in pretend that the immense violence and suffering they experience in prostitution is not something that needs to be dealt with. And the equality model proposes a way forward to dealing with it in a way that puts the victim at the center, which is, as I said, the victim is, you find a victim, you help the victim, you don't harm the victim, but you have to start addressing the demand. If we don't address the demand, it will continue to exist, will continue to be normalized. And as the report shows, there is a direct relationship between normalizing the buying of sexual acts and other problems in relations between men and women, in sexual expectations, including by boys. And also it gives more room for pimps and those benefiting to continue to operate. As I have said in my report, it is a problem that we try to make a distinction between prostitution that happens in the context of trafficking and prostitution that happens sort of, or suggesting that what happens outside, and to deal with the forced prostitution through anti-trafficking legislation, because anti-trafficking legislation and efforts have shown to have failed in really protecting women, in saving women, in cracking down on pimps, in also holding everyone and all those that benefit from the exploitation of women accountable. And trafficking is not the only human rights lens. We have to also look exactly at the experience. And it's horrendous things that happen to women. So even those women that may have entered not knowing the full consequence of what this entails, quickly find out the full consequence. But by the time they find out, it is impossible to leave, with huge, huge ramifications for their physical health, for their lives, their life of their children, and also their psychological well-being. So we cannot also let states off the hook by pretending that this is normal and that this should be normalized. States have a responsibility to take care of the most vulnerable of their society. We always talk about not leaving anyone behind. We understand that gender equality is necessary for the development and prosperity of nations. So we cannot let states off the hook, particularly when some states are adamant to even benefit from the exploitation and abuse of women and girls by taxing women and girls in prostitution.
Thank you, Nina.
Thank you, Nina Larson, AFP. So just a follow-up on what you were just talking about. I know there are people who are in prostitution who say that they choose to be to do so. what do you say to them? And then also the issue of criminalization of the men or in this situation. There have been worries about that driving this underground and making it more difficult to detect. So if you had thoughts on that issue. And I had a separate question. You mentioned pornography and the expectations among young men and I guess also girls, perhaps, what their sexual expectations are. Could you address the issue of pornography in the context of the internet, where it's become much more prevalent, and what you sort of see in the case of young people growing up today? If you think, how big a problem do you think that is for young people today? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. As I said in the council earlier this morning, of course, organizations that claim to speak on behalf of women and girls in prostitution, they are those that represent those with lived experiences, but there is also a group amongst them that represent the interests of pimps and traffickers and businesses that benefit from prostitution. Because in addition to prostitution being a system of exploitation, it's also a business model. It has shown to have attracted and led to the proliferation also of other illegal and criminal activities like money laundering, like trafficking in human beings, etc. So it brings profit, and I think this is the main issue that it's the elephant in the room. We know that prostituting women and girls is an issue that brings about profit, and therefore we have to take also everything we hear, with a pinch of salt, and also acknowledge that when it comes to designing policies, for example, around prostitution, some groups that represent women and girls that are victims, survivors, that wish to follow the abolitionist model that I've just spoken about, that do not agree with the legalization of all aspects of prostitutions, get sidelines, get attacked, do not get invited to these policy discussions. They are not tied to powerful lobbies with a lot of money. And so when I'm asked, such as was the case in the morning, like you have to make sure that you speak to all those that have been affected. Well, I am doing that precisely because this consultation and this report actually offered the opportunity for voices that are usually shunned and undermined to be heard. And to come forward and to speak about what they also would like to be done about this. I have reviewed the models and I have reviewed the data that is available on the consequences of the different policy models. And I would disagree that the equality model, based on what we have seen in terms of results in France, in Sweden, in Iceland, in a number of countries that have applied this equality model that I have mentioned to you, has resulted in an increase in the problem. On the contrary, because in fact, legalizing all aspects of prostitution is what leads to the flourishing of pimping, leads to the flourishing of demand, leads to the flourishing of violence, and the continued abuse of women within that context also continues. So we have to look at the data. I have published the vast majority of the input that I have received ahead of this consultation. There are now around, I think, 280 pieces of input received. And you and others can see for yourself the amount of data that exists to describe the different models and the outcome of those.
Follow up on that. I would be interested if you could, you mentioned a few countries, if you could provide us with some examples of the different other countries in the different categories. And then also I had a second part of my question, which you didn't answer, which was on pornography. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So I I wanted to also say, actually, before I get to pornography, that, I came to this report with a very open mind. In fact, I was one of those that had used the term sex work in the past, in fact, in the context of 2 reports. Of course, as experts, we cannot be expected to be on top or, profoundly know every single issue we're going to write about. But just to say that I came to it really without any predisposed positions. But I have to also listen to the evidence and listen to the victims and have come, therefore, to the conclusion that this is not the right terminology. With regards to pornography, again, a very eye-opening aspect of the report, also because of its immense normalization in society. We are seeing actually very concerning wide, unlimited access by particularly, I would say, adolescents to pornography. And many of the young boys and girls get the information on sexual activity from porn, which again is a business model, which also thrives on bringing in new elements, but also in the hope of keeping their users hooked and interested and come back for more. It's becoming also more and more violent. So you have a situation where, in particular, young adolescent males, boys, but also men, are therefore consuming pornography that is becoming more and more violent, where, things such as choking is normalized, defecation, gagging, really things that put the lives of women and girls at risk. So as a result, girls are being asked also more and more to do things that they are uncomfortable with. They are increasingly sexualized and pornified, and there is evidence to show also that a number of sex offenders in a number of countries are becoming more and more younger. I think in the last few months, we've heard of 2 gang rapes in Belgium, for example. I'm also a Belgian citizen, so I follow the news in Belgium. In the UK, I think there has been also reports showing that the young adolescents are becoming also offenders involved in sexual rape and abuse of girls, and it's a world that is therefore becoming more and more dangerous for girls, and is shaping really the relations between males and females, men and women.
Paula, did you have a follow-up?
Actually, I'm just thinking, I just wanted to give my colleagues a chance to ask questions. But, on the issue of economic need,
yes.
I don't think you answered that, that part of my question either.
I have, in the sense that one of the pillars of the equality model is that you also have to provide women with appropriate relevant exit modalities. So you have to give them assistance and support. You have to give them support in housing. But interestingly enough, also many of the women need also psychological and medical support. Often when it comes to medical assistance, we talk a lot about HIV, AIDS, and harm reduction in HIV, AIDS, but a lot of these women are addicted, unfortunately, to be able to deal with the reality, to drugs, to alcohol. They, as I said, are suffering from immense trauma. And so there needs to be a web of immediate support first, in order to allow women to make also decisions about whether they can exit. You have to also support them in training, providing them alternative livelihood measures. So all these are programs that have to be put in place in order to help women exit prostitution. It's not enough to say that you are decriminalized. You have to be provided with alternatives. And all the women I've spoken to have said that if they had other viable alternatives for themselves and their children. Because in the end, why do they have to do that? Many of them do this also because they need to feed their children, they need to take care of family, there is no other alternatives. Some of them get forced into it, obviously because of war and conflict, etc., and abuse of power. But there are women who have to do this because of being impoverished, because of having no other livelihood opportunity. But it's the easy way out for states then to say, well, this is the reality, this has been around for God knows how long, and it will continue to exist, and then sit back and do nothing about it. And I am trying to challenge this normalization.
Thank you for that. Yes, there's a question over here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Mohammed from Turkey's Anadolu News Agency. Thank you for the brief. My question is, I was wondering, what would you like to say about the situation of women and girls in Gaza? Did you include them in your report also, specifically after, especially 7th of October? Thank you.
So my report didn't speak about women and girls in Gaza specifically, but in the section that looks at the causes of violence, causes of prostitution, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, obviously conflicts, dire humanitarian settings contribute also to women and girls being entrapped in trafficking, being entrapped in prostitution, slavery, forced marriages. We see all this proliferate in situations of conflict, yeah.
Any more questions in the room? Okay, any questions online for the Special Rapporteur? Okay, I see none. So with that, I will draw a close to this press conference and give my thanks to Ms. Alsalem, and hope to see you all following the council, which concludes, we hope, on July the 12th. Thank you.
Thank you so much.